January 26, 2023. Baltimore, Maryland. The sun shines brightly on the streets as a young father steps out during his lunch break, eager to visit the most important person in his life, his daughter. His steps are light, his intentions simple. A quick walk down the block to see her. A brief pause in a hectic day, a moment of peace in a world that demands so much. But what should have been a simple act, a father spending time with his child, was about to turn into something dark, something violent.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
Desmond Gardner was gunned down in broad daylight, just steps from his daughter's door. 3 masked men, ambushing him without warning, without mercy. In that moment, Desmond's life was violently ripped away. A son. A father. A man with so much to give. Now gone. Who was responsible? And why him? By the end of this journey, you'll learn what it truly means when justice is delayed. When the system falters. When the pain of a family is stretched over months of waiting and wondering. And how one decision, a single act of violence, would echo through the lives of everyone it touched. Desmond Gardner was more than just another victim of violence. He was a son, a father, a man trying to make his way in the world. Like so many others, he carried the weight of responsibility, striving to provide for his family, to give them a better life, and most importantly, to be there for his daughter. To be her hero. Desmond's pride, his purpose, was his daughter. He was raising her in Baltimore, a city he knew well, one that had shaped him into the man he became. Desmond wasn't looking for accolades or recognition. All he wanted was to make sure his little girl had a future that was safe, full of love and opportunity. He worked for the Department of Public Works, a job that didn't make headlines, but it mattered. Every day, he showed up, put in his hours, and quietly gave back to the community that raised him. He wasn't a man who sought the limelight, but those closest to him knew who he truly was, a dedicated father, a hard-working son, a man with integrity. But on January 26, 2023, that world, the one he worked so hard to build, was ripped apart in an instant. In one tragic moment, everything Desmond had worked for, everything he loved, was gone. Just like that. It was a simple decision, one he made every day. A lunch break. A chance to visit his daughter. Nothing more. Nothing less. But for Desmond, that walk to her apartment on Spelman Road would be his last. For Desmond, this walk was just another routine. Another day of balancing the responsibilities of being a father, a worker, a man of routine. He was close, just a few steps away from his daughter's apartment. Nothing in his world suggested that today, this simple act of love, would lead to his death. But someone was watching. Someone with ill intentions. 3 masked men, hiding in the shadows, waiting. Waiting for the perfect moment. As Desmond turned a corner, just a few steps from his daughter's apartment, the attack came without warning. 3 men, guns drawn. They ambushed him. Shot him in the back. The pain must have been unbearable. The fear, unimaginable. In an instant, everything he worked for was gone. His life, his future, taken from him. The cold, unforgiving reality of violence ripping through the fabric of his world. The brutality of the crime hit like a wave. Desmond's body was left to lie there, on the cold Baltimore streets, alone. He wasn't just murdered at that moment. He was silenced forever. And for his family, his daughter, everything changed in an instant. But it wasn't just Desmond who was lost that day. His mother, his daughter, his friends, each one of them would feel the ripple effects of his murder. His death wasn't just a loss to the community, it was a heart-wrenching blow to those who loved him most. What followed was a manhunt, a relentless pursuit for answers. Who were these men? Why Desmond? What was their motive? And who was responsible for ending the life of a man who only wanted to see his daughter, to live his life, to be with the ones he loved? Desmond's daughter, far too young to understand the full weight of what had just happened, would never see her father again. His absence would be felt in the smallest of moments, the moments that parents take for granted. And for Desmond's family, the loss would be something that could never truly be measured. But even in the darkness of this tragedy, there was something else that lingered, a promise. A promise to seek justice. To make sure that Desmond's death was not just a statistic, that his life mattered. The pursuit of justice would soon become a journey, one that would shake everything his family knew, and forever alter the lives of those responsible. It was a moment that should have been just like any other, a father on his way to visit his child. But it was here, just steps away from his daughter's apartment, that Desmond Gardner's life would come to a brutal and senseless end. Desmond, unaware of the danger lurking just a few feet away, was ambushed. 3 men, 3 strangers, appeared out of nowhere. No warning. No words. Just shadows closing in, and the sudden, brutal reality of violence. The first shot rang out like a clap of thunder. It struck Desmond in the back. A perfect, cold betrayal. The first of many, and the last he would ever hear. Desmond collapsed onto the unforgiving pavement of Spellman Road, the blood staining the street where he had once walked so innocently. His life, taken in an instant, spilled out into the cold Baltimore night. But why? What had Desmond done to deserve this? What led him to that moment, a simple walk to see his daughter, now transformed into a death sentence? Desmond had no enemies. He wasn't involved in any dangerous dealings, no criminal affiliations. He was a father, trying to balance his job and his love for his daughter. He was the type of man who worked hard for everything he had, asking for nothing in return but the chance to be there for his family. But none of that mattered in that moment. All that mattered was the cold reality that Desmond was now another victim of senseless violence. He had been left to die on the street, abandoned by those who took everything from him. And yet, this would not be the last time the world heard his story. The killers had vanished into the night. But they couldn't escape the evidence. A shell casing left behind. A weapon fired. A trail that would lead investigators down a path they hadn't anticipated. Desmond's death would not be in vain. His story was far from finished. The world hadn't just lost a man that day, it had lost a father, a son, a man whose potential would never be realized. Desmond's family, his daughter, would soon learn of the tragedy that had befallen him. And they would begin the long, painful journey of trying to understand why. His daughter would never see her father again. His mother would mourn the loss of her son. The pain would never fully go away, no matter what justice the system promised. The question remained, who could do something like this? And why? In the days that followed, the investigation began to unravel a story far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The killers weren't strangers to each other. They weren't random figures in the night. No, these were men with names. And the truth of what happened that day would come to light, piece by piece, until the full horror of Desmond's death was revealed. The hunt for answers would take months. And it would reveal more than anyone expected, about the crime, about the killers, and about the lengths some would go to hide the truth. In the end, the question would remain, why was Desmond Gardner killed that day? And what did the world lose when he was taken from it? Desmond's story had only just begun. And the truth would come with a price. As the news of Desmond Gardner's death spread, the weight of the tragedy set in. A young man, a father, taken from the world in an instant. Baltimore's police and the FBI immediately launched an investigation, hoping to uncover the truth behind a senseless crime. But in those first hours, there were no answers, no leads, just a cold body and the unanswered question, why? There were no witnesses. No one had seen a thing. The street was quiet when Desmond fell. His murder seemed like a random act of violence, unprovoked, shocking, and senseless. A man on a simple errand, ambushed in broad daylight. The brutality of it left investigators grasping for clues. But every crime scene tells a story. And though the pieces seemed scattered and meaningless at first, they were there. Small clues, waiting to be uncovered. They would slowly reveal a much deeper, darker truth. It started with an unlikely witness. A nurse at a local hospital had reported something strange, a patient, admitted with gunshot wounds, who had refused to speak much about how it happened. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. One of the men involved in Desmond's murder had been injured. And someone knew who he was. This small lead took the investigation in an unexpected direction. Police now had a suspect, a wounded man. But who was he? And was he involved in Desmond's murder? The web of lies, secrets, and deceit had only just begun to unravel. Days later, another piece fell into place. A stolen vehicle, found near the scene. The car's owner had reported it missing hours before the murder, but its connection to the crime hadn't been made yet. A man named Paris Harris was inside the car when police found it. When they approached him, he bolted, locking the glove compartment and running. It was in that moment that things began to change. Inside that glove compartment, police found a handgun. The very same type of gun that was used in the murder of Desmond Gardner. Ballistics tests later confirmed that the weapon was linked to the crime scene. Harris, who had tried to run, was now firmly connected to the murder, but the deeper question remained: who was the second man involved? And then, social media brought a disturbing revelation. Pictures surfaced on Instagram of Harris and another man, Anthony Curry, posing with guns. The photos were old, but they provided a chilling glimpse into the world these two men inhabited. They were no strangers to violence. The idea that they could be involved in Desmond's murder started to look more and more likely. It wasn't just social media. Surveillance footage from the area showed a man, Anthony Curry, wearing the same pants he had in those Instagram photos, just hours before Desmond's murder. The evidence was piling up, but there was still one critical piece missing. Who exactly had pulled the trigger? The pieces of the puzzle were all there, slowly coming together, but the final connection was still elusive. Curry's cell phone records would soon provide the last link. His phone had been tracked to George Washington Hospital in Washington, D.C., where he was treated for gunshot wounds the same day Desmond was murdered. It wasn't a coincidence. The investigation had just turned a corner. The trail had led the investigators to an undeniable conclusion. Curry had been injured, likely by one of his own accomplices, and then sought medical attention in an attempt to cover his tracks. But this was no longer a game of chance. The evidence had become a tight noose around Curry's neck. As the investigation closed in, the walls began to close around Curry. He could no longer hide behind his lies. The evidence, his own actions, the connection between him and Harris, the ballistics, painted a damning picture. He had been there, in the middle of it all, part of the plot to murder Desmond Gardner. The truth was out there, and it wasn't going to be buried. But for Desmond's family, the question remained: would justice truly be served? Was there more to this than they had been told? This investigation wasn't just about uncovering a crime, it was about revealing a truth that many hoped would remain hidden. Desmond's murder wasn't a random act. It wasn't senseless violence. It was the result of a deeper, darker web of choices, decisions, and betrayals. And in the end, it was about one man's quest for justice, no matter how long it took. The pursuit of justice is never a straight line. For Desmond Gardner's family, the fight was only just beginning. The breakthrough in the case came when the police finally caught a break. One of the suspects, a young man, was fleeing from a stolen vehicle. In the panic of his escape, he left behind something far more important than he realized. Inside the glove compartment of that car, hidden from sight, lay a weapon. A handgun, now critical evidence in the murder of Desmond Gardner. The moment the ballistics tests came back, the connection was clear: the shell casings recovered from the crime scene matched the bullets fired from this very gun. But this wasn't just another piece of evidence. This was a game-changer, a link to the killers. However, as the investigators soon realized, this was only the beginning of the road to the truth. The man who had been caught fleeing the vehicle was none other than Paris Harris, a 20-year-old with a history of criminal activity. Harris had attempted to run, but his escape was short-lived. He was arrested, and soon, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Harris, it seemed, was one of the key players in this brutal crime, but what role did he play? What had led him to pull the trigger? And who was the other person involved in Desmond's murder? It wasn't just the stolen vehicle or the gun that tied Harris to the murder. Social media, specifically Instagram, would soon reveal more about Harris and the man who stood beside him in the shadows. Harris and another individual, Anthony Curry, were both caught in photos brandishing firearms, posing casually, as if the weapons they held were mere accessories to their lives. But these were not casual poses. These were images of men who were no strangers to violence. In one particular photo, Harris held the very same gun found in the stolen vehicle. The connection was undeniable. These men, Harris and Curry, were not random criminals, they were accomplices in a cold-blooded murder. But even then, something about the whole situation didn't add up. The investigation wasn't over. There were still questions, still hidden clues waiting to be found. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they began to search not just for physical evidence, but for a deeper connection to the crime, something personal, something hidden in Desmond's own community. It wasn't just about finding the killers, it was about understanding why they had chosen Desmond. And the more they uncovered, the more they realized that the murder wasn't random. There was a story behind it, a connection buried beneath the surface. Desmond's life wasn't just taken in a vacuum. His murder had echoes in the community. The investigation revealed that Desmond's relationship with the men who killed him was far more complex than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just a senseless act of violence, it was a crime tied to deeper personal motives, perhaps jealousy, betrayal, or something else entirely. According to local sources, Desmond had known both men. He wasn't friends with them, but their paths had crossed before. There were whispers of past conflicts, unresolved tensions, that Desmond, in his quiet way, had tried to avoid. But sometimes, avoiding the past is impossible. Sometimes, the past catches up to you. Desmond had worked hard to stay out of trouble, to protect his family from the dangers of the streets. But in the end, the violence that defined the world these men lived in was too close to him, too dangerous to escape. Harris and Curry had their own reasons for acting. And Desmond had unknowingly walked right into their world, becoming an unwilling participant in their story of crime and retribution. The pieces of the puzzle were now clear. The men who had killed Desmond were no strangers to each other, and they had woven a dangerous thread between them. But who had pulled the trigger? Who had taken Desmond's life, and why? As the investigation continued, the answers seemed to be right in front of them, yet the final reveal, the gunman's identity, remained elusive. The hunt for the truth was far from over, but the pieces had fallen into place. As the investigation zeroed in on the two men, the question of who fired the fatal shot was finally about to be answered. The gunman's identity was no longer a mystery, it was only a matter of time before the rest of the truth came to light. Desmond's death may have been senseless, but the truth was becoming clear. The investigation into his murder was about to take a dramatic turn. Soon, the world would know exactly who pulled the trigger. And for those who thought they could hide behind their lies, justice was on its way. Social media has changed the game for both criminals and law enforcement alike. What was once a private space for sharing moments, for social connection, has now become a powerful tool for investigation. In the case of Desmond Gardner's murder, the very platform criminals used to boast about their lives became the key to unraveling the truth. Curry, the second suspect in Desmond's murder, had made a fatal mistake. He had posted a photo on Instagram, wearing the same pants he was seen wearing in the surveillance footage that captured the deadly ambush. That seemingly innocent image became a critical piece of evidence. It was no longer just a photo, it was a confession of sorts. This discovery turned the investigation on its head. Curry thought he could hide, thought he could walk away from the crime. But social media doesn't forget. And this time, it had betrayed him. The once seemingly insignificant photo now held him to the crime in ways he couldn't ignore. But the most damning piece of evidence wasn't just the Instagram post, it came from something far more personal, far more intrusive: cell phones. Curry's phone, which had been in his possession during the time of the murder, pinged across the city. It didn't just stop at Desmond's murder scene. No, it led investigators on a trail that ended in an emergency room, miles away. Curry's phone was traced to a hospital in Washington, D.C., where he was receiving treatment for gunshot wounds, just hours after Desmond was shot. How did he get there? Why was he in a hospital, far from the crime scene, if he wasn't involved? The question was impossible to ignore. Curry had been shot, likely by one of his own accomplices, but he wasn't giving up any answers. His injury wasn't something that could be easily explained away, especially not after everything else investigators had already uncovered. What had started as a senseless murder was now unfolding into something far more calculated. The trail of evidence, social media, cell phones, and medical records, pointed to a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone had expected. Curry was no longer just a man with a gun. He was part of a larger, more dangerous web, and the truth was beginning to surface, piece by piece. Cell phone records, Instagram posts, and hospital visits had turned the investigation from a search for a random killer into a pursuit of a well-planned conspiracy. Curry's role in Desmond's murder was no longer in question. It was now a matter of uncovering the details of how he had become involved, who else was part of the plan, and why Desmond had become a target. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together. What seemed like a senseless act of violence now revealed itself to be part of a much larger, more insidious plan. And for Curry, the path to justice was closing in. The evidence, irrefutable, undeniable, was piling up against him. The story of Desmond Gardner's death was far from over. The investigation had only just begun to uncover the dark depths of what had truly happened that fateful day. And soon, the world would know the full truth behind the murder, the lies, and the criminals who thought they could outrun justice. Two men. Two very different lives. But their paths collided in a deadly way. Anthony Curry, 24, and Paris Harris, were no strangers to crime. They were products of their environment, born into lives where choices were few, and survival was a daily struggle. Curry had a history, a trail of criminal activity behind him, while Harris, at just 20, had yet to make a name for himself in the underworld. But together, they would become part of something far darker, something they couldn't escape. Curry, known for his cold, calculating nature, had been involved in more than his fair share of illegal activities. Drugs. Theft. Violence. His reputation was built on fear and manipulation. Harris, on the other hand, seemed more like a pawn in Curry's game, a young man pulled into a world he didn't fully understand, but too deep to escape once he was in. The two of them together created a dangerous combination, one that would ultimately lead to Desmond Gardner's murder. What made Curry pull the trigger on Desmond? Was it personal? Or was it simply a crime of convenience, a quick opportunity that he couldn't pass up? Desmond had become a casualty of a deeper, darker plan, one where Curry's motives were unclear, but his actions were undeniable. And in the end, it wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a crime orchestrated by two men whose lives had been shaped by choices they couldn't take back. But there was more to this partnership than just crime. The investigation would reveal a dangerous alliance built on lies, manipulation, and greed. Curry was the mastermind, the one pulling the strings, while Harris played the role of the reluctant accomplice, his decisions shaped by the influence of a man who knew how to get what he wanted. Curry wasn't just a criminal, he was a predator, using Harris as a tool in his pursuit of whatever he thought he deserved. It was Harris who made the first misstep, the small mistake that would unravel their whole plan. When police found him inside the stolen vehicle, his attempt to flee only led them closer to Curry. The chain of events had been set in motion, and soon, Curry's role in the murder would become impossible to deny. The hunt for Curry had intensified. But the investigation wasn't just about finding him, it was about understanding the twisted relationship between these two men. The bond that had led to a senseless murder. A bond built on manipulation and fear. And as the investigation unfolded, the question remained, would Harris, the young pawn in this deadly game, turn on his partner? Or would Curry's influence be enough to protect him? Curry's cold calculations had set everything in motion. And now, with Harris caught and the investigation gaining ground, it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The connection between these two men was no longer just a theory, it was a fact, a dangerous partnership that led to one man's death and another's fight for survival. For Harris, the path ahead was unclear, but for Curry, the walls were closing in fast. The connection between the perpetrators was sealed, but the true depth of their involvement was far from over. In the end, it wasn't just about what happened on that street in Baltimore, it was about the choices they made, the lies they told, and the cost of those decisions. The trial of Anthony Curry lasted 5 days. For 5 long days, the courtroom was thick with anticipation. The prosecution presented their case methodically, laying out the evidence that tied Curry to the murder of Desmond Gardner. From the Instagram photos to the cell phone records, the gun found in the stolen vehicle, and the ballistics reports that linked him directly to the crime. The case against Curry was strong, but the emotional weight of the trial was felt most by those who had been left behind, Desmond's family. For Desmond's family, the pain was still raw. His mother, who had lost her son in the most brutal of ways, and his daughter, who would grow up without her father's love, their loss was unimaginable. Each piece of evidence presented in the courtroom was another reminder of what they had lost. And yet, even as the trial unfolded, there was one question that echoed in their hearts: would this trial ever bring them the justice they so desperately needed? As the defense attempted to create doubt, arguing that Curry's involvement was less direct, the prosecution pushed forward with a passionate plea. Desmond's death was not just an accident, it was a senseless act of violence, planned and executed by a man who had no regard for the life he took. Curry wasn't just a bystander. He was a participant in a calculated conspiracy. The jury had to see this for what it was, a deliberate crime that robbed a family of their future. The jury deliberated for hours. The air in the room was thick with expectation. Would the evidence be enough? Would they find Anthony Curry guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and firearms charges? Desmond's family sat quietly, their hearts heavy, hoping for the justice they so desperately needed. When the jury returned, the room fell silent. The verdict was clear: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and firearms charges. Curry had been found guilty. But as the words settled in, a lingering question remained: was this enough? Was this really justice for Desmond Gardner? For Desmond's family, the verdict was a moment of relief, but it didn't bring him back. No verdict, no sentence, could fill the void he had left behind. His mother had waited for this moment, but the weight of her sorrow was too much to bear. His daughter, who would never again feel her father's embrace, could only hold on to the memory of the man she lost. The trial of Anthony Curry was just the beginning of a long road to healing for Desmond's family. The pain, the loss, would never truly end. The justice they had received would not erase the years stolen from them. And while the law had spoken, the emotional scars remained, hidden beneath the surface, felt with each passing day. For Desmond Gardner's family, the trial had provided a measure of justice. But the pain of his loss, of the life taken far too soon, was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The courtroom was quiet now, but the echoes of that day would never truly fade away. Desmond's death changed everything. His daughter, too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, would grow up without the father she loved, without the man who had been her world. She would never know the comfort of his embrace, the joy of his laughter. His family, his mother, his friends, everyone left behind, would have to navigate life in the wake of this loss. They would live with the constant question: what if? What if he had made it home that day? What if this tragedy could have been avoided? The hole left behind by Desmond's death was one that could never be filled, no matter how hard they tried. But even in the darkest of times, there's a glimmer of hope. Desmond's murder sparked something within his community, a renewed commitment to safety, a pledge that no other family would have to endure the same heartbreak. Desmond's death, while tragic, ignited a fire in those who knew him to work together, to ensure that such senseless violence would not be tolerated. In the midst of their grief, Desmond's family found a cause, something to hold on to, something that would carry them forward. For Desmond's family, the road ahead would never be easy, but through their pain, they found purpose. Desmond's story would not end with his death. It would continue, in every step they took toward a safer, more hopeful future. Anthony Curry was convicted, but the final chapter of this tragic story was far from over. His conviction, while a victory for Desmond's family, did not bring immediate closure. Curry's sentencing would not take place until March 30, 2026, a date that felt like an eternity for the Gardner family. As they waited for the court to officially hand down the punishment, they continued to grapple with the pain of their loss. Would this trial, this verdict, be enough to give them the peace they so desperately needed? The delay in sentencing only stretched the agony for those who had been left behind. Desmond's family, still reeling from his murder, knew that the conviction wasn't the end. They understood that justice was not a simple thing to achieve. It wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about finding some sense of resolution, some way to begin healing. But as the years passed, the pain never faded. Desmond's story is one of loss, of a father, a son, and a man who was taken far too soon. It's a story filled with fear, anger, and confusion. But it's also a story of hope. A hope that no one, is above justice. A hope that, in the end, the truth will prevail, and the pain will be acknowledged. But for those who survive such tragedies, justice is never enough. No verdict, no sentence, no ruling can erase the years lost. It's a long road to healing, and sometimes, the hardest part isn't the fight for justice, it's simply learning how to live with the pain, to find a way to carry it, and to keep moving forward. Desmond Gardner's story is not just about a murder. It's about something far bigger, a ripple effect that reaches far beyond one life lost. It's about the lives that were touched, torn apart, and forever altered by a senseless act of violence. Desmond's death didn't just end his life, it fractured the foundation of his family, his community, and left scars that would last a lifetime. What are the moral lessons here? What do we learn from the choices of those who commit such heinous acts? What does it mean when a life is taken so callously, without regard for the pain it causes? The consequences are far-reaching, touching not only the victim but everyone who knew them.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.